Emanuel, why Hamlet?
Well, I think the question would be, why not Hamlet? It's a play that, from a personal perspective, that I've lived with for decades as a source of some of the greatest of English poetry in our language. Um, it's a play that has been performed many, many times all over the world. It's, as you say, probably the most famous play of Shakespeare's. But it's a play that has exerted, I think, an enduring fascination for audiences for centuries now. In part because there's something about this that's indescribable. There are mysteries upon mysteries in the play that continue to engage the attention of audiences everywhere. So my answer to that question, why Hamlet, is, again, why not Hamlet? It's a magnificent play. It's compelling, and despite the fact that I've read the play so many times myself, I also felt that engaging with it in an actual theatrical production would be a different level of experience. And I was right, because it was.
What do you think accounts for Hamlet's enduring appeal?
I think a lot of factors account for that. As I say, I think it's a play of many mystery. It's a ghost story. It's an improbable thing. Imagine a ghost story having such a fascinating influence over the centuries on people. But it's a ghost story, but is the ghost real? That's one mystery, for example. It's interesting that in the play, that only Hamlet hears the ghost. The others, the guards at the beginning, see the ghost, if in fact it's a real ghost. Only Hamlet hears the ghost. So that raises the issue of whether or not, as in Macbeth, what we're hearing is the projection of Hamlet's own inner imaginations or inner imaginings. That's one mystery. The other mysteries have to do with the characters themselves. Was Claudius an evil, ambitious, avaricious, lustful kind of king, or was he in fact someone who was holding the state of Denmark together? Was Polonius a prattling fool, a powerful figure? Was he an autocratic, authoritarian father? Was he sinister? He was all these things. I think all of these characters themselves contain mysteries. Another mystery, was Ophelia pregnant, for example? So the play contains these kinds of mysteries, and other people have posited its effect by saying, the Oedipus complex is at work, for example, and if you've seen the Olivier version, you'll understand that. But I think we can't really quite describe in any easy way why this play has fascinated us for centuries, except that there's this inherent ambiguity about almost everything. We just don't quite know. We can't ever pin Hamlet down. Was Hamlet likable, for that matter? That's a good question. In many ways, the character we see in the play is not particularly likable, although he may be considered the glass of fashion and the mold of form, the observed of all observers, and all of that. It's also a play about betrayal. We don't quite know who or why, who loves whom in this play. That may be a factor in all this. Everybody's snooping on everybody else. Everybody's betraying everybody else. And I'll mention while I'm on this, the character of Horatio, because I think Horatio has been kind of relegated to this sort of comrade of Hamlet's, a faithful friend. I have my own theory about that, which I'm not going to impose on us now, but Horatio is a very important figure, and he, in fact, may be the greatest villain in all of Shakespeare. But I'll leave that aside. The other aspect of Hamlet that I think makes this so enduring and fascinating is that you have here, it's a tremendous ensemble piece. All of these characters, all these roles are powerful and they're strong. Claudius, Gertrude, Polonius, Ophelia, Hamlet, these are very strong characters.
How did you approach directing this play? In fact, how do you approach Shakespeare?
The first thing one has to do is, is to render the play in a form that is presentable to a modern audience, and I mean that solely in terms of time. I had to cut the play in some fashion. every production, just about every production we see on film or on stage, is cut or is shaped in some fashion. And I had some time limits. So it was my job initially to figure out how, as much as I didn't like to cut a word out of Hamlet, because I personally love the play so much, how am I going to create a dramatic production that will be watchable, tolerable, and powerful for people? And so therefore I had to make cuts, and what I chose to do was not to create pastiches, but really just to excise aspects of the play. For example, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were sacrificed in my production. I took out parts of a character's speeches as I thought I had to create the flow, and again to reduce the long time that Hamlet, in the most full text that we have, would take. It's a play that would take 4.5 to 5 hours to perform in full, in toto. So I had to get that down to somewhere around 2.5 hours. So that's one approach. The other aspect of the approach, though, is because I believe so firmly that the drama of Shakespeare resides in this a unique, powerful, cogent, beautiful, eloquent poetry and language, that I wanted to preserve those aspects, and I made a great emphasis on making sure that as actors we would speak Shakespeare knowing what we were speaking. We would speak it with conviction, with clarity, and with the color and resonance that poetry really demands. It's the poetry that carries really the whole dramatic action and the great psychology and the excitement of Shakespeare. And while I'm at it, I'll say too this: there's this misconception that people in Elizabethan times, at the Globe Theatre, for example, they could follow all of this, tremendous poetry and language very easily. They could probably follow it a little better because the mode of the language was more in the mode in which they spoke, but they could not follow the depth and richness of what we see in Shakespeare and hear in Shakespeare. They could get the flow, the musicality, some of the images, but we're not handicapped as modern audiences. In fact, so much of the Shakespearean language is part of our English language heritage. We're not handicapped. We can follow it as well. Did I answer? I answered a few of the questions. What others did you have?
There was a minimalist approach to set and costuming. Would you elaborate on presentation choices?
Okay, well, I think in that regard, because I see the language as being primary, that the other aspects of the production are more incidental. So I didn't have a budget of $5 million to recreate Elsinore and the environs of Elsinore, and I don't think we need to. I think we can allow audiences, through this very rich language, to respond with their imagination, to use their imagination. In this production, we kept props to a minimal, and I think that worked greatly in our favor. There's enough drama without having to clutter it with, I think, unnecessary objects, for example. In terms of the actual setting of the play, it's actually become almost rare now that we'll see a Shakespearean play that's set in the approximate time in which and scene in which the play was actually originally set. So we'll see Shakespeare in the Roaring Twenties, or Shakespeare in Wall Street, or Shakespeare in Siberia, or Shakespeare in Uganda, or whatever. And those approaches are fine, and those approaches may be very powerful and cogent. Personally, for me, I much preferred with Hamlet to have the play set in a way that it was indicative of the time in which it was originally set. And I find that human nature has not changed in the 500, 600, 700 years or 1,000 years, really. And it's also of inherent interest how these human dramas and emotions and whatnot played out in those times at the court of Elsinore, for example. Shakespeare doesn't have to be worked at to be made relevant. He's inherently relevant. The words, the plays are relevant. The dramas are relevant.
You've touched on your handling of the text and the cuts that you made and the liberties you may have taken with the original. Is there anything else you want to say in respect of that?
Well, I think, again, to speak of cutting a play as a liberty is a little anomalous, but it is a liberty. And I did have to make some excisions, as I said. In only one instance did I reinsert a very famous passage that I think we couldn't do without, what a piece of work is man, that occurs with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So I made that kind of a soliloquy for Hamlet. But aside from that, everything else really was just a matter of excision. I don't know if you mean by that question whether the other liberties that I can think I took in the direction of it, and directors take lots of liberties, are, well, I'll give you a few examples. In the scene where Polonius is reading his letter from Hamlet to Ophelia. Now, in the text, there's not an indication that Ophelia would be there or was in that particular scene with Polonius, Gertrude, and Claudius. But I thought, given everything, the scene that had gone before, where Polonius talks about going to see the king to Ophelia, that it was essential that Ophelia be there and that her position in the play be accentuated by the fact that she is being used as a pawn by her father, that she is someone put in a very difficult situation. So I thought it was very important to take that liberty and have her there for the beginning of that scene where Polonius actually takes the letter, reads what Hamlet's been writing to her, and then dismisses her. So it shows a lot in that one particular scene. It shows a lot about his relationship to his daughter, his relationship to the state, to the royalty of Denmark, and the current dramatic action. Another, I guess you call this a liberty, is in the great Hamlet To Be or Not to Be soliloquy. I have never seen a production where Ophelia has been present during that scene. But we do know that we think she's overheard that scene because she's supposed to be set up to make sure Hamlet sees her. And so when we did this, I had Ophelia on the side, watching and hearing and listening to Hamlet, who thinks he's alone, speaking about the inmost aspects of his soul and highlighting this tremendous poetic ability of his. And I think if there's anything Ophelia fell in love with Hamlet, is my personal feeling, it's his capacity to put into words things in words that other people or no one else really could. I mean, it's the greatest of English poetry. And here she is, very subtly watching him as he's unawares. And I think it creates a whole different kind of flavor and tension to that soliloquy. So that was a kind of liberty. I'm trying to think, I may have had some other examples. No, we'll leave it at that for now.
You yourself played Polonius with original pronunciation. What influenced that decision?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that, as I've studied some linguistics and I've done some readings of Beowulf and Chaucer, and I've had an interest in the evolution of the language. And I suspect it indicates a kind of dissatisfaction with the way that I've seen Polonius portrayed in many other kinds of productions, right? I think he's been portrayed in a particularly linear or slighter way than he might be portrayed. And I feel that he's a very unique character in this drama. In fact, you can say that as a result of his actions, in his directives to his daughter not to have anything to do with Hamlet, for example, that he may have tipped Hamlet over the edge, if in fact Hamlet is mad or not mad, etc. And with his spying, he may have, of course, he inadvertently gets Hamlet to kill him. So he's a very interesting and enigmatic figure. And I thought that using original pronunciation would kind of do several things. It would sort of set him apart. And I think he needs to be set apart. And it would also lend a particular kind of color and a way for me to get into the character that I think I would not have been able to get into had I used received pronunciation or an American kind of accent or some other kind of accent. I think it really gave me a chance to bring out more of the richness of this character.
Would you talk about Shakespeare's characters generally and how you render them?
You have a cast of characters that are very robust, that are very interesting, that are very human. So let's take Claudius, for example. Do you want to play Claudius as if he's got two horns and a tail, just to make sure we know that he's a bad guy or did something bad? Or do we want to really understand that Claudius is a man of many parts who and there are theories that actually he's a much better king than his brother, who risked the whole kingdom or much of the kingdom, for example, on a duel with the king of Norway at the time. There's an indication that he's a kind of person, he's a charmer, that people like him, that he's actually a good king. Okay, he's preparing the kingdom for an onslaught that he knows is being sharked up by Fortinbras. And he loves Gertrude. We think he loves Gertrude. So there are many facets of this. I think we can let Shakespeare direct us by using his language and not deciding to take any particular clear, severe agendas with these characters. Other examples, Hamlet himself. Oh, this is a major question. Is he an ineffectual person who's just lost in thought, who can't act except under impulse? Is he a strong, wily, charming person? There are so many dimensions of this, and I think to single out a particular aspect and to work that to death works against the rich complexity of the characters. And you can say this for every particular character in that play. Polonius is a good example. Again, is he a buffoon, kind of, a pedant, a prattling fool, or is he sinister? Is he powerful? Actually, he's a bit of all these things. We do know from the text, from the language, he's a very powerful man in the state. He's a lord, and they depend upon him a great deal. He probably loves his daughter very much, but he loves her as a father would love a daughter in those times, in a kind of very authoritarian, probably misogynistic way, because women at that time were treated generally as chattel. He probably loves his son as well, Laertes. So in playing these roles, I think it's important to bring these very dimensions out, and they will shift and change sometimes from performance to a performance. Ophelia, another example. Is she a young, innocent, and in fact, if I may digress a little bit, if there's a real personal tragedy in the play, I think maybe the tragedy of Ophelia is more central than the tragedy of the Prince of Denmark. After all, she's caught between this love for Hamlet, love for her father, this reliance on support from her father. But anyway, to get back to Ophelia, you can play her, is she completely innocent? Is she chaste and innocent? Or is she a vivacious, sensual person who in fact has been engaged in relations with Hamlet, who in fact may very well be pregnant? And there's a lot of evidence, incidental evidence in the play, to support the fact that she probably is pregnant. And then how do you render her? So these are all the questions that come up, and I think you have to use the text and experiment with how the scenes go and come to a complex presentation. So to answer your question, I would say my emphasis would be on the multifaceted, multidimensional, complex aspects of these characters, these human beings.
That transcended caricature.
Yeah.
What does a director actually do in a production like this?
What does a director actually do? Well, ideally, a director, in the ideal world, should do almost nothing except create a space for the actors to do their best with an interpretation of something. In reality, what I do as a director is I like to establish basic parameters for a production, such as wanting to get across the multidimensionality of these characters and various aspects of logistics and whatnot. But I see my role as director as really catalyzing the actors to bring something special and unique to their portrayals within these very general parameters, and then to see what develops out of that, so that it really is a collaborative venture. People are different. If one Hamlet may have a greater ability to portray certain aspects of a character, another Ophelia may have a certain talent in a certain direction, and you have to see how it goes. But I think as a director, I find the greatest joy in being more a catalyst than someone who's saying, go here, do this, do that, do this, do that, etc., etc. Now, one example I think I can give you of directing is another example of Liberties in directing. There's in the scene after Hamlet gives his to be and not to be soliloquy, and he sees Ophelia, and Ophelia approaches him. In this production, they kiss. Now, that's not written in the script, and that's a liberty. That's a directorial liberty that I took. I thought it was very important because she talks about giving him gifts she has longed to redeliver, and I thought in that kiss that, in many ways, could condense tremendous amounts of that play. The love for each other, even though she at the same time is sort of betraying him. She knows that Claudius and Polonius are listening in, but she also knows they're not seeing this. So it's a beautiful moment, I think, dramatically, where she is attempting to give him her love, and he is responding in the way that he responds. He recoils, he can't control his own love. And again, all these complexities and various interpretations abound that we can come away with. That was, I think, a very important moment, and a directorial moment as well, to do that. Another example may be in the scene where Gertrude comes in, Laertes and tells Laertes and Claudius that Ophelia has died. She has a soliloquy or a speech. It's very hard to render dramatically, and it's very hard to render in any way that's realistic in a way, but it's magnificent poetry. And it took a while to work out several things about that presentation. And one way that the way that we arrived at was for Gertrude to enter as if in a state of shock or trauma, almost as if she were just in a trance, and to deliver this speech in a very minimalist way that heightened the drama of it. And that was, I think, ended up being extremely realistic and also very beautiful. She was positioned, there was a triangle of Gertrude, Laertes, who discovers his sister is dead and himself is in shock, and Claudius. And I thought that was extremely powerful in rendering it that way. So a director does stuff like that, and lots of other choices, and in collaboration with the actors who have ideas about how to play stuff. That's great. I would encourage actors, when they felt in the zone and the spirit of their characters, to do all they could do with that, and to play with things, to change things.
Your actors spoke to and engaged the audience, which personalised the experience in a way. Was this done in Shakespeare's day?
Yeah, no doubt. If you watch the modern Globe productions that are going to be traveling, and at the Globe in London, they do the same thing. The actors could see the groundling's eyes, for example. They could talk. There were a lot of asides in Shakespeare. There's ample evidence that the actors did feel they were engaging with the audience, and that barrier between stage and audience was a bit permeable. So I thought, particularly for Hamlet, there was an additional metaphorical layer on this, which is I wanted to diminish that barrier in our production between the audience. And I also wanted them to see that these were actors playing out a play, because in Hamlet there's a play within the play, as you know, and that as another kind of metaphoric resonance. There's a play within a play, and the play within the play is used to kind of solve a murder mystery, as it were. So there are a lot of these things that you could sort of manage. But as you say, yes, I did feel that the actors in Shakespeare's day, I know that they did address the audience and include the audience in this kind of fashion.
audiences may bring a blighted perception of Shakespeare, and specifically Hamlet, a result of unsatisfactory experiences of Shakespeare in schools. Do you have any thoughts about this aversion? And do you feel the success of your production wielded a positive influence there?
Well, I think you'll have to ask the audiences if it wielded a positive influence. I think we got a lot of good feedback, and I think that there was one person who talked to this point very specifically and said that she had last seen a Shakespearean production in high school, which she detested because she did not appreciate the way in which Shakespeare was introduced, and was very surprised to find that Shakespeare could be so much fun and so interesting. So I can't speak to how Shakespeare is generally taught. I think I was very lucky in my own experience because Shakespeare in high school was very interesting, but I was reading Shakespeare since I was 8 or 9. You don't even remember how it was introduced to me, but I just loved the language of it, so I had a different experience. I think all too often schools tend to diminish things that are very alive and very rich. I'm not sure how exactly they do it, except that they make things mandatory, they make things compulsory. It's like spinach. Eat it, it's good for you, no matter what. And they tell you how great it is, and tell you all these, well, you have to experience things for yourself. Now, one thing about Hamlet is that there are a lot of very funny bits in Hamlet. Hamlet is very funny. Despite the fact that it's a tragedy, there are some very humorous bits. The bit with the gravedigger, for example, that's very funny. Or that bit that we did and how we played Ophelia with Laertes giving advice. Polonius giving advice to Laertes, where Ophelia was mimicking her father as he gave advice. That's a funny bit. That's a little directorial thing added, but there's humor in Hamlet as well. There's humor in all of Shakespeare. There's tragedy in all of his comedies, and there's humor in all of his and virtually all of his tragedies as well, to some extent. I think people have to experience the vitality and the beauty of the language and it's relevant. Let me answer it by giving you another way to answer this. Every teenager has gone through what Romeo and Juliet went through. Okay, they fall in love. They're infatuated. They want to die. They can't imagine, right? But Shakespeare has given those characters a language that we as ordinary teenagers can't for ourselves unless we're extraordinarily talented. But when we hear Shakespeare's language, it adds a whole new sense to and richness to our experience. This is, I think, the kind of thing that has to be gotten across. There's a tremendous beauty in that. And not to mention, and one other thing I want to mention as well, I think is very important, is that, Hamlet, to get back to the question about enduring fascination, I think it's subject to a multiplicity of interpretations. There are many facets. There are many things you can get out of it, and they can be different and sometimes opposing. A good production will give you a sense that, yes, it can be played differently even. You can play these characters even differently, or you can have different slants. That's the greatness of this play. It has many interpretive abilities, and it's a wondrous thing, and Shakespeare can do that for us. One scene that comes in my mind is there's this magnificent part where Hamlet has the skull of Yorick in his hand, and he's just talked about kissing the lips, when Yorick was a jester and he was a kid, and he says, "Get thee to my lady's chamber," not knowing Ophelia is dead, looking at the skull, whose lips are not there, but he talked about the lips of Yorick. I mean, you can't even describe the kind of power that is in a scene like that, in a moment like that. And Hamlet is full of these kinds of things. So it was a great privilege for me to be involved in it in a way that just made it even richer and richer.
You mentioned in-text evidence of Ophelia's pregnancy. I was wondering what that is specifically.
Oh, I'll give you two good examples actually. Well, there are three areas of evidence. One, she's buried with maimed rites, indicating if she in fact died accidentally, as Gertrude describes to us, then she would have had a full, ordinary religious burial, okay? But she's buried with maimed rites, indicating that there was a suicide, she took her own life, or maybe she took the life of someone else with her. That's a little bit of evidence. There is another bit of evidence at circumstantial in the way that Polonius talks about the letter that she receives from Hamlet to the beatified, I forget the exact word, the celestial whatever, and beatified Ophelia. That's a code word for pregnancy, I think. Okay, that's a deep interpretation. Beautified. When someone's pregnant, they become beautiful. They are kind of beautified. That's a code word. Plus, in Polonius' own language, he's concerned, they're concerned, he and Laertes are concerned about Ophelia having relations with Hamlet. Birth control in those days was pretty rudimentary. Polonius, in the scene where Hamlet is pretending to read a book and Polonius is sounding him out, he talks about how pregnant Hamlet's replies are. So pregnancy is much on Polonius's mind, on the father's mind. These are clues. Now, when we take these clues, it isn't as if we have to have Ophelia walking around the stage with a pillow to make sure that we get the idea, but these are the resonances unconsciously that the audience will take. Is she pregnant? Is she not pregnant? She may be pregnant. She very well could be pregnant. We don't know. Another one of these mysteries. That's why this play is so fascinating. We don't quite know. How sensually involved with Hamlet was she, I think the way we played it, she was a knowing person, a knowing young woman in the full bloom of youth, with an extraordinarily powerful man at court who loved her and whom she loved. So these are the things, I say, that go into an interpretation. Now, but again, the point being that even if I were absolutely convinced Ophelia was pregnant, how do I present it? Well, I don't have to do anything special. I'll let the words present it. I'll let subtle actions give us the idea that maybe it's a possibility. And here, just after Hamlet has spurned Ophelia and she is extraordinarily distraught, and he speaks about marriage and about a nunnery, a place, for example, where a young woman with an unwanted pregnancy might be confined, you'll see that Ophelia will instinctively put her arms around her womb, her midsection, and in this beautiful, lovely gesture that Harriet makes here, we have all these resonances and implications of a possible pregnancy, of concern about pregnancy, in a way that will, I think, be understood by the audience subconsciously or subliminally. It's to me, this is extremely powerful and very, very beautiful.
Talking about Ophelia, how did you convey her madness in that wonderful scene?
Well, she is a very talented person. She conveyed her own madness. I think getting those kinds of scenes, getting the right tone for those scenes, for any of these scenes, is always an issue for collaboration between actor and director. And I do remember talking with her about achieving a certain, I call it a willowiness or a lissomeness or a softness, particularly in that first mad scene, in addition to these very strong, she's a very strong physical presence into this sort of strength that she would launch into. And I thought that that's the kind of thing that just occurs through collaboration and getting, and the actor or the actress really being catalyzed to just give of her best in that.
What about your presentation, though?
Well, that again, that's also another example of collaboration. I made a small suggestion at one point about her perhaps using her makeup, a brighter, more garish kind of makeup in the mad scene, and she was initially went against her conception of the character, but as she thought about it and she gave it a try, and then she kind of went to town with it, she saw that it was really very effective to sort of have this overmade, almost smeared overmade up that indicated her derangement, her grief. Was she mad? We don't even know. Again, was Hamlet mad or not mad? Was he mad playing it madness or sanity? We don't kind of quite know. Was Ophelia really mad, or was she so grief-stricken? Was she putting something on? these are all of the things that go into this kind of fascinating play.
You ended Hamlet on a very positive note with Fortinbras. Tell us about that.
Well, it's in the play.
I know it is.
Many productions end, actually, as a history of productions, ending with Hamlet saying the rest is silence, and with Fortinbras not coming on and whatever. And I think it's very important that we have the presence of this foil to Hamlet. Here, after all, is a Hamlet-like character. His father was done in legitimately, and he is going to get revenge and to get his piece of land back. He's got no qualms. He's got no philosophy to hold him back. And he comes in and he mops the place up, basically, after everything has been, everybody's dead. And we get there's a sense of rebirth at the time, and a sense that maybe the same damn thing is going to happen with the next family that inhabits Elsinore or any other royal court. But I think it is a very important, I think it's essential to end the play in that way.